We want to solidify what we're doing and what we're talking about in the context a little bit of where these panels came from. So we launched this series, the Adaptability in Education Leadership panel series, long title there, but really it just means we wanted to create, Sean and I were talking about this way earlier in the fall of last year, that we kind of wanted to create this space that was not just one event or one evening, but a ongoing series that is really meant for people in educational leadership positions, administrative positions, to kind of find a little bit of support, a supportive home amongst colleagues and friends, that they can kind of think about what their place is in this world. Like I always say, as we're marching into the age of AI here. So in this world that is not going to stop changing, how can we be models for that change in all the facets of what we do and the work that we do, so that the people that we are around every day and the people that we serve every day and in our communities and in our schools can kind of work with us in that I guess mode of adaptability. And I think that's what we're trying to socialize, this idea of being adaptable. Isn't that right, John?
That is exactly right. Adapt is one of the key components here, and especially in this age of AI and this age of whatever age we're in. You know, the gig of leadership requires, in whatever title, whatever role, requires some level of adaptability. So we'll take a deep dive into that, and not only just with this panel, but in the course of the series. And we also, as I guess another part of our why in forming this is making sure that the conversation continues in some way. There is a lot of loneliness fatigue in leadership. There's a lot of loneliness fatigue in education, and our hope, Sarah and I have a hope, that the conversation continues after this panel. And that, you know, there may be an idea that Jackie or Elizabeth or Bobby share, or even our guests share, and that might, hey, let's talk more, or let's continue that. It's kind of like when you leave camp, right? Or when you write in the yearbook, we'll write back, or we'll be friends forever. Well, we really want us to be supportive and accountable in a supportive way for keeping the conversation going.
Yes, and we also want to keep in mind this idea of fostering dialogue as part of professional development and as part of the way we grow and learn. We were talking before we pressed go on this panel tonight, we were talking about that a little bit amongst ourselves, and the meaning, how meaningful that can be to get into that groove of thinking of conversations like this, or like we'd say that they're a panel to differentiate it from a webinar. But in the same, but really what we're thinking about is it's a group of people talking about something that they feel passionate about or deeply about, and they want to bring other people into that conversation. And that's the kind of work that we like to keep fostering and connecting over and passing on. I love how Sean always says it keeps going. So we'll stop talking, and we want to turn it over to the wonderful people that are in this room with us tonight. First of all, I'm Sarah. If you don't know me, if you're tuning in from, rewatching this somewhere and you don't know who we are, I'm Sarah, and I'm the community manager for Swivel, and I have been a middle school and high school English teacher for 15 years before turning into the wild and crazy, wonderful, rewarding world of community management for the education, I guess, community or world, if you want to say that. And so now this is what I spend a lot of my time thinking about. What are the big ideas that we need to be working on and we're working towards, and what are they having, not only just for education, but what do those ideas have in common with what we're all working on, you know, in the larger world and the larger society, and how can I gather educators and leaders around those ideas so that we can start just building on them and gaining momentum in the work that we do. So it's really meaningful to me to connect with people like that are showing up for these panels to make that work happen. That was longer than I needed to talk, but Sean?
That's fine, Sarah. I am Sean Gaylord. I am Sarah's sidekick in swivel, and very grateful to co-host this evening. I'm a longtime educator. I'm a principal here in North Carolina at the App State Academy at Middle Fork. I also was a high school English teacher. I host a podcast, Principal Liner Notes. I've written a book called The Pep Effect. I'm working on book number 2 as we speak, taking kind of a similar tack from one of our panelists here, writing a page a day,
Mhm.
trying to meet a deadline. Elizabeth is nodding her head affirmatively. So yes, and actually, that's actually kind of a good segue to introducing our panel. So I'd love to just I'll kind of kick us off and start us off with introducing Elizabeth Dampf. Who is an educator. She is the director of professional learning at Round Lake area schools, and you may know of some of her work through various blog posts and articles published by ASCD. Elizabeth is also a former guest on the podcast, and someone I am just very grateful and honored that she's here. And Elizabeth, you have a book coming out in the spring, correct?
Yes, I do. The first one's in the spring, and that is how to make your systems turnover proof, because turnover is probably one of the hottest issues in education. So, very excited for that.
Awesome. And I definitely see, and I was very honored to preview that book, and I definitely see some intersections from that book kind of working its way here into our topic. So really grateful that you're here with us, Elizabeth. And then Elizabeth kind of connected us to our next panelist, and very grateful that she is here, and that is Jackie Wynkoop, and she is the secondary instructional coach for Bellefonte Area School District in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. I might add, as you're listening to this, guests and folks that are tuning in, all of us, maybe with the exception, all the panelists here, with the exception of Sarah and I, are trapped in some sort of snowy scene. It's a snow day. There are multiple snow days, but anyway, I digress for just a second. But anyway, Jackie is the host of the PL Playbook podcast, and that's a podcast to tune into. Definitely tune into Elizabeth's episode as well. And I know we'll have all of that information in the show notes and such. But Jackie, welcome to our panel. It's great to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to our chat. And, Elizabeth and I connected on the podcast about the topic of professional learning, which is what the podcast is all about. So if anyone after tonight would like to connect and join as a guest, I would be very grateful.
Wonderful. Yes. Again, the intersections are just so great. So we're grateful that you're here. And then another kind of 6 degrees of separation, and someone I'm very grateful that he's here amid snow days and such, and the three snowflakes that landed in the DC metropolitan area. But very grateful to have Bobby Policino here. He is Bobby. If you listen to last week's panel, was referenced quite heavily, and rightly so, by one of our panelists, Stacy Roshan, and they work together at the upper school at Bullis. He is an educational leader. He is a presenter. He is an author. He is based in Potomac, Maryland, and he is also the author of a great book that came out last year. Again, very honored to preview that as well. The Principal Leader, which came out of the Road to Awesome publishing company. So, Bobby, it's great to have you here, my friend.
Thank you, Sean. I'm looking forward to joining Elizabeth and Jackie for the conversation, and excited to be here with you and Sarah.
Well, we've got a lot of adapting to do and a lot of discussion and conversation about our topic tonight. Again, for those of you that are tuning in, please feel free to share your learning using the hashtag Adapt, Lead, and Connect. You're also welcome to comment on our stylistic choices. All of us in black, and it looks like we got another gig at the Ramada Inn, in Hackensack, New Jersey. So we'll be playing there after this
After the
webinar.
show.
I got to make a music reference some way or the other. So Sarah, if you want to take on our first question with our panel.
Sure. So our topic again tonight, just to kind of bring us all into the space and into center, is modeling adaptability and mindset for true professional growth. And so we're gonna start off. We're gonna go through some questions and kind of bounce around and hear from every panelist, and they can ask each other questions if they want. And if it turns into, if we go off in slightly different directions, that's totally okay and fine. But we're just gonna use the questions that we have here as a little bit of a just some bullet points to hit along the way. So totally fine if we veer off. So we're going to start by talking about in the traditional sense of the way people might view leadership in a school or leadership in education. So traditionally, people might think of leaders as just, and even if, especially if they're outside of the education system, we might think of them as involved mostly in devising improvement plans or implementing ways to improve certain aspects of performance or the way something is run, et cetera. But how can educational leaders shift that focus towards, instead of that only that traditional path, to focus towards modeling, being adaptable, and embracing change as something that's a constant, which Frank said before. Change is a constant regardless of how it comes about. And then as an extension of that, maybe we can think about what strategies we can employ to promote that shift in mindset. Maybe I like to always ask someone to volunteer first, but if no one wants to volunteer first, I'm gonna choose Elizabeth.
I was going to volunteer anyway, so it's
cool.
fine.
I had a feeling there was a vibe going on.
Was it that you saw me checking my notes because
Maybe.
I got the side eye? So I think that acknowledgement of that damaging history, really one of the more damaging effects, if you ask me, of NCLB was this model of school leadership where leaders concoct plans and roll them out, a term that I hate, by the way, but push them on teachers. And I think what we've learned in the last 20 years was that that model doesn't work. And so I think any efforts to model an adaptability mindset and to try and lead by example has to start with, first, some sort of acknowledgement of the concoct a plan in an ivory tower and push it down teachers' throats is ineffective, but then also to reframe what it means to lead change in the first place. Getting rid of that us versus them. I am the proper change leader. Teachers must be dragged along kicking and screaming. I'm going to get the early adopters and then turn them into saints, and then I'm going to do what I can with the middle teachers, and then the people who are crotchety curmudgeons will stay over there. They're the bottom 10%. There's nothing that I can do about them anyway. We have to erase that whole mindset altogether, and we have to get rid of this us versus them mentality that I think that we've been made to adapt as leaders for the last few decades. So I'll stop there. I have a few more positive suggestions, but for me, I think just getting that elephant in the room on the table of this is what we assume a lot when we think about change leadership, and we have to start changing our assumptions. And I'll also just conclude with this: that model of leadership is pretty much all I've ever known as a leader. So I became an administrator in 2014, and when I was in my program, it was 100%. Change leadership is the only leadership. If you do not regularly innovate and lead radical reformation in your building, you're failing. So this is a challenge for me too, to get my head out of that assumption and to try and think of a different model of leadership.
I love that. Thank you. And if you have more to say, we can come back to you, and that's totally fine. Not putting any time limits on anybody here in this type of, I think, style of discussion. Jackie, do you want to weigh in a little bit from your perspective?
Yeah, I'm just smiling over here because, Elizabeth and I are already talking on the podcast. She just speaks so eloquently. And I was going to say something similar, but the way she says it is just amazing. So, like Elizabeth, when she was mentioning that she hates that term rollout, I can't stand it either. It's one of the worst phrases, and I try not to use it. But she talked about this idea of leading change in a way that brings everybody along in the process. And I think just that idea of building teacher agency is so, so critical. And we have to, as leaders, be willing to adapt and let the teachers lead and listen to them. And, one of the questions that you asked initially along with this is maybe just some strategies that leaders can use to promote that mind shift and possibly even to just build teacher agency. And one of the things that we have done in our district for a couple of years is we have put a twist on the traditional PLC model. And sometimes that acronym PLC is thrown around in so many ways where you hear it and sometimes teachers cringe, right? Because sometimes PLCs really aren't what they were intended to be. They're glorified staff meetings, or they're just times when people get together and it's not really focused on the kids and working toward a goal. So in our district, we coined, they're called BLCs, which stands for Bellefonte Learning Communities. And the way they work is teachers of any content area, and they can even cross content areas, cross grade levels, if they have a similar professional learning interest, they can form what's called a BLC. So they form a mini group of teachers, all sharing the same passion project, for lack of a better word, but it's all based on a need that they're seeing in students. So for instance, a couple of years ago when we first started, we were really noticing a lack of engagement in our secondary students in regard to independent reading. Students weren't picking up books. They didn't want to read it all independently. They weren't visiting the library, which just as a huge reader, it makes me really sad. So we formed a group of about 8 teachers who were committed to researching best practices for independent reading at the secondary level and then implementing those practices via action research. And it was completely led, planned, facilitated by teachers. Different teachers on the BLC took turns throughout the year planning for and leading those sessions. We even had an administrator asked to be a member, and we politely declined and said, this is only for the teachers right now. However, our leadership really trusted us to implement it the right way. And we use that time so effectively. And we have bigger things now, there's protocols. So there are things that we have in place, just for lack of a better word, that accountability measure. But it has been the most amazing thing that has happened in our district to really adapt our traditional professional learning model. So kind of going back to your original question, I think that we definitely have to adapt to change and try to step outside the box and creatively think about ways that we can tackle an issue. And for me, as an instructional coach who works directly with teachers, though I have been a middle school vice principal and a director of gifted, I just really love supporting teachers. And I think that teachers are the most critical in really implementing change throughout a school and throughout a school system. So that's just one way. I'd be happy to share resources related to that BLC if anybody's interested. And there's even a podcast episode titled A Twist on Traditional PLCs where I do talk more about that. And there's links in the show notes. But that's just one idea that kind of popped into my head.
Yeah, I do think that anyone listening here or joining us later would love resources like that. So we did none of that. I don't think anything like that came up last week, but feel free to drop anything. Either you could wait till the end, but any resources like that would be useful, or that we've been referencing, that would be great, especially a podcast episode that gets us all listening to each other and connecting after this. And I know Sean's gonna be into that. And I love that you brought up the trust element there as well, because I think that's something that's going to be a pattern. The trust between, trusting our teachers to do this work alongside us is key to all of this. And we hear so much arguing about that over the internet everywhere we look. And so that's one of the reasons I think these conversations are important. Bobby, I'm turning the spotlight to you.
Yes, thank you. So just picking up a little bit from Elizabeth and Jackie, and talking to your teachers as professionals and thinking about what it is that you see in your most successful classrooms. And those are teachers who develop this trust and this strong relationship with their students. It's not, that traditional top-down, straight lecture, you do what I say. That doesn't work anymore. And so why would you expect that to work when you're talking to your teachers as a school leader? You need to have a level of respect and engagement with them, and talking to them about their successes, right? I think educators do so much to focus on the success of their students, or department chairs talk about the success of their teachers. They're always looking to deflect their own wins And when you can get them to think about how they've successfully navigated change and then ask them for ideas and suggestions, if there's things that we need to do differently in our district, in our building, whatever it may be, what are they seeing? What are some examples of the way they've navigated a difficult situation in their classroom? We don't have to go that far back in history to know how quickly we all changed our classroom experience, and we all came out of that on the other side. And so I think the more that we can remind our teachers about their agency, the more we can talk to them about their ability to navigate change, and then ask them for their suggestions and their feedback, and then to implement some of them. I think that's one of the most important things as educational leaders. If you ask for ideas and feedback, but you have no intention of using it and you never implement it, you're going to erode any of that trust and any of that relationship that you build. So you're going to have to be able to do some of that.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in really quickly, I put a little bit of this in the chat, but Bobby, you were making me think, well, yes, treating teachers like professionals, what that ultimately, that's an important phrase, but I think it can easily be misinterpreted as you're a professional, meet my expectations as a professional does.
Right.
I think that's really only 5% of what treating teachers like professionals actually looks like. So yes, certainly bringing them into the decision-making process as far as how something should look and as far as what resources they need. So thinking about the BLCs at Jackie's district, that is building in a support system that allows teachers to access something that they need. But I also think that treating teachers like professionals means not assuming that we have all the answers or that we can sit around on our laurels and not practice what we preach too. So
Yeah.
for me, if we're looking at how to adapt, provide an adaptability mindset, a lot of it comes down to not evangelizing something unless you yourself are living the life that you're trying to get teachers to live. And it sounds obvious, but then when you're a principal or you're a district leader and you're buried in meetings and you have so much paperwork and you have so many other things, it's very easy to forget that you lose your street cred if you're not willing to do what you want teachers to do.
I love that we're,
Absolutely.
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was gonna, and one of the things I've been fortunate enough to do working at an independent school as an administrator is teach a class, and that's been so important to me. To your point, Elizabeth, as I'm talking about writing comments, right, or reaching out to students or reaching out to parents, and the fact that I'm able to be in a classroom and show that I'm still aware of seeing what that is, because I think one of the worst things we can say as school leaders is, well, when I was in the classroom 10 years ago, and that immediately shuts down any chance of a positive and engaging dialogue. So I think whatever the opportunity is that you can live it and model it, it doesn't have to be in the classroom, but whatever it may be is really going to help in those conversations.
Well, and acknowledging that the doubt and the remove from the classroom is part of the conversation. So if you're in a
Yep.
district where you don't still teach as an administrator, every passing year that you're not in the classroom creates a bigger and bigger gap between you and teachers, whether you want to admit it or not. So I think the smart thing to do is to admit it. I've been out of the classroom for 10 years myself, and use that as a step to honor the expertise of teachers, not
Yep.
necessarily to say, oh, when I was in the classroom and good teaching never changes and you guys will figure it out, but to say, because you're still a practicing expert in teaching, that's why your opinion is so crucial to this.
Pausing for
Yes,
one
I'll
second.
add on to Elizabeth's just phrase of, acknowledging the expertise in the room. So many guests on my podcast have said that, because it's exactly what we need to do as leaders. We need to honor their expertise. We need to honor their experience. And I think that's critical to us all adapting and moving forward.
Well, it's tough because as a school leader or a district leader, you might have a hard time saying it's been a while since I've taught, and you still feel like you have to put on this front of expertise of like, good teaching is good teaching, and even though I taught high school math, I can still be. And you just don't want to say it because you're afraid that you're going to sound foolish or that teachers won't take you seriously if you admit that there is a bit of a gap. So for any leader who's thinking, but I can't say it aloud, I get it. And also, I think you can find ways to segue and to cover that bridge pretty easily.
There's some great comments that are being
Yeah.
generated in the chat, and I think too, just in terms of, and I want to kind of, and actually the next question kind of echoes where Elizabeth in her response to the first question has everything to do with mindset. And this kind of echoes a little bit of a conversation I had with a principal friend of mine a few months ago, where we were kind of commiserating and talking about our trials and tribulations and challenges and opportunities and those things. And my colleague said, Sean, the lesson plan that worked for us 10, 5, 10 years ago, 3 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it is, doesn't work anymore, from a leadership level. And Elizabeth, just kind of a very healthy, full-throated dismantling of and rightly so, dismantling of kind of the same thing that we do as leaders. All right, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do small incremental changes, I'm going to get my little group of beetles and give them the cool stuff, shame the other folks, and maybe guilt everybody into coming along, and it's not working. It's just not, it's not working. So Elizabeth, I'll throw this to you in terms of mindset and the role that it plays in the perception of change. I know you've touched on it in your responses. In fact, all of our panelists have touched on this in our discussion now. But how can educational leaders cultivate that mindset that views change as a neutral force? How can we harness that? How can we, and then not only harness that, but sustain that, to your point, in the just the bureaucratic minutia that some leaders have to face. The paperwork, the meetings, the photo ops, all of those things. What are some ways that we can lean into that and
Sure.
adapt to this mindset shift?
Well, I think if we want to view change and have a mindset that embraces change as a neutral force, the first thing to do is use neutral language. And if you consider the way that we have historically talked about change in education, it is loaded, emotional, volatile, and polarizing. So you have this thing where leaders in particular are guilty of talking about change as inevitably good. And it's this wonderful new thing, and we try and sell it as like this awesome thing that's going to make learning better, make behavior better, make your lives easier, or whatever. And that sales pitch naturally comes with sales like techniques. And then look at the way that many leaders talk about teachers. We talk about, as you said, the Beatles or the early adapters, and like they're really innovative. They embrace new initiatives and they're forward thinking. And then we talk about the curmudgeons and the stick in the muds. And so all of that overly emotional language works against the idea of viewing change as neutral. So if you're trying to have change as a neutral mindset, get rid of the volatile language, first thing. I also think that if you can view change as just a state of reality, and as we've seen in the chat, the only constant is change, you need to take a look at what fear of change does to your work efficacy. So if you love change or hate change, if you're putting your own emotional baggage on top of that idea, you might have this anxiety and fear instead of, what do I need to do this year to deal with something? So here's an example that I think many educators might be able to identify with. This year uniquely in education, maybe last year too, educators across the country are seeing student behaviors on a level that none of us has ever experienced. My teacher friends report being hit, kicked, bitten in the classroom. That is something that no one was ever prepared for. It is something that has a great deal of power to inflame our emotions, right? And I'm not going to stand here and say it's good that this is happening. And I will also say, if we get too emotional about what educators need to do in order to address this reality that student behaviors are off the charts right now, we will not be able to actually do what we need to do to fix them. So if we sit here hand wringing and fist shaking over, when I was in school, that would never have happened, and the very idea, and my parents would have, which, trust me, I understand the temptation. But if we let ourselves get too carried away in that volatility, we won't be able to implement new behavioral policies that we might need to, or try new strategies, or help the kids who need help. Or frankly, where some of us are at, just get through the year, right? So we have to think of what the consequences of too much emotional baggage are, which comes down to our efficacy, right? And then think through, all right, this is just one example of how I have to adapt, and I have to encourage teachers, related services staff, and other leaders to adapt in order to cope with reality. And it can't turn into a Shakespearean drama. It just has to be what it is.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Jackie, what's your take on that, building on what Elizabeth shared?
Of course, I completely agree. I think one of the key things I was jotting down here is that if we really present change as just a constant pursuit of improvement rather than a disruption, and that every change is the opportunity to kind of get better and to enhance our outcomes. But the other thing that I think is always missing, or not always missing, but often missing, and I don't think it's for lack of anybody trying or caring, but again, it goes back to your idea of leaders just being bogged down with so many different tasks and situations daily. I mean, my husband's a high school principal. He barely has time to eat lunch. And I know how that is when I was a middle school principal. But if we are going to navigate changes effectively with our staff, with teachers, we have to provide the professional learning resources and support to navigate those changes effectively. And I feel like oftentimes it's lost, or it's not done as strongly as it should be. So just, we really need to make sure that as we're making these changes and we're embracing them, we're asking teachers to embrace them, that we have to equip our educators with those skills needed to navigate that change in the right way.
So with that said, there are, and I've been guilty of this as a principal, where I will default to the cheesy icebreaker. And I know there may be some folks that dig the icebreakers. I will default to the meme. I will default, and I have this thing where, man, I'm going to find the right meme and it's going to just say everything. I'm going to find the right YouTube video. I'm going to find the right TED Talk, and all the lights are going to go on. So what are some ways in which we can adapt to that shift in professional learning that you offer? I want to build upon that.
I think it's kind of going back to what I said in my response to the initial question. It's just bringing teachers in as part of the process. I mean, in our district, we have a district-wide professional learning committee. When we decided to revamp our model, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, because we noticed there was disengagement in professional learning. There were lots of staff members, sick on professional learning days, and you could just tell that there was just a lack of engagement in sessions. And honestly, the leaders dreaded facilitating those sessions. They dreaded planning them. And that's really, we wanted to bring joy back to professional learning and to the idea of us growing and learning together. So we developed a district-wide committee, and it comprises teachers across all content areas, different subject areas. We have support staff members on there. And honestly, it's our team that researches best practices for professional learning, surveys the staff, collects feedback on how things are going, and plans and facilitates our professional learning day. So I would probably estimate that about 80% or more of our professional learning is entirely facilitated by our own staff, not from outside presenters. I do think you need that every once in a while, but we've completely shifted to that model. So I think bringing teachers along, but also in a professional learning model, making sure that we're offering sessions or resources that focus on the idea of resilience, that focus on problem solving, that focus on embracing new methods and new strategies, and just making sure that they're supported along the way. So I just think overall, we need to completely adapt our professional learning model as well. And part of that means always having teachers be a part of the process.
Can I add a little bit of nuance on that, though? I agree, and I think that sometimes we overcomplicate things, and sometimes when we're trying to encourage a new way of doing anything really in education, it can be very tempting to go back to that, let's concoct what we want people to do and then deliver it via professional learning. thus making it look like a task that teachers have to do. Because as the director of professional learning, I can confidently say not all teachers love professional learning. Jackie, it stabs me in the heart that that's the case, but I think you
true.
and I both know that this is true. And
It's
so
true.
sometimes when you deliver some advice or, new techniques or whatever via professional learning, you're almost giving it a bad name. And so if we can find some ways of being maybe a little bit more casual, embedded, and colloquial sometimes, instead of putting the most important things in one of the most despised vehicles in education, that seems to be a way of not overcomplicating it and not adding some of this, like, I don't know, emotional baggage that comes with professional learning onto something that we want to see changed. So I agree. And I also think we have to be careful about what we deliver via PD and how we deliver it, because it might almost have the opposite effect to what we want.
And I will just say, I agree with you, but as an instructional coach, if you don't have coaches in your school or in your district, I really strongly believe in the power of coaching, because that's how, yes, they might go to a professional learning session and learn this or learn that, but ultimately we want to see it in practice, and we want to make sure that it's being implemented the best way for the kids. And that comes through that either one-on-one teacher planning, me going into classrooms, modeling, co-teaching, whatever it looks like. So having a coaching team or some people in your school or district that are able to support teachers in that process beyond whatever that initial implementation looks out, I think is really key.
I would add with that, Jackie, agreeing with both of you, what that coaching does is having that conversation and allowing that time for reflection and reflecting on that change and what comes through that. Because a lot of times, Elizabeth mentioned the emotion that comes with change, or that comes with that new initiative or whatever it may be. And oftentimes when we can reflect, either because we're writing it down or through a dialogue and talk through it, some of that emotion can subside, or maybe it comes out in the conversation. But as we continue that dialogue, we get to a point where we realize that this change is allowing for growth, as you mentioned before too, Jackie, right? It's like through that change is how we're growing. And we know that people want to improve, right? Everybody wants to get better at their craft in whatever way that looks for them. And so I think being able to have those conversations and talk through that change can be really helpful.
Wow, these are some great moments here, and Sarah, I can only imagine the folks at Swivel as they're pulling all of these just gems from all here. I'm just, man, there's just I want like another hour or two with this panel, because we're just hitting.
I do have to say, I love the vibe of you all feeding off of one another. That to me is one of the powerful things of us kind of building this together, these sessions together. And I may not have met any of you before you, except for Sean, of course, before you walked into this room, but it feels it's so easy to build a professional community when you all come from, we're all kind of connected already in some way, and now we're a real community here, I think. So I can feel that difference, is what I'm saying, as I have these conversations. And where I'm looking at the time too, and there's about 15 minutes left, and I'm excited about transitioning here into this last topic that we're going to tackle tonight. And I'm going to add something a little to it, because we're going to end by talking about feedback and the importance and power of being open to feedback. And I want to add one of my favorite words to this as well, which is reflection. And I don't think it's that far. It's not really much of a deviance from what we were planning on talking about, but I like to think about feedback and reflection together a little bit. So we're thinking about adaptive leadership. We're talking about what it takes to make that effective, and to accept that it is adaptable and changeable over time. And what I'm also thinking about is being open to feedback, being open to, I think, really encouraging reflective practice, both in leaders and in our teachers, and being open to feedback as a part of that reflective process in order to kind of invest that personal growth and well-being into the work that we do. So I know I'm kind of adding a step here, but we're thinking about how can educational leaders create a culture where feedback, and I'm adding sort of reflective practice to that as well, is encouraged not only from people who we see as our superiors, but also from our team members. So maybe we can hop back to Elizabeth if you want to start us off there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one reason why a lot of practitioners in any job description maybe feel a little bit hesitant about feedback is that there isn't enough attention paid to giving good feedback. So I have gotten feedback from caring, compassionate coaches and from good bosses and from my colleagues. And I have also gotten feedback from screaming, threatening, hysterical people. And the first kind is the kind that I pay attention to. But the second group might also have been right. It's just that the way that they delivered it was appalling and not something that made me want to actually change. But I am trying to think of the last time, if it's ever even happened in all my years in education, when anyone taught me or taught my colleagues how to give good feedback. And so the fact that we don't pay any attention to how to give good feedback to a colleague, to a boss, to a subordinate, we don't really discuss that. We just sort of assume like, you're a teacher, you're an educator, you know how to do it. You know how to tell the guy next door this and, your boss that and your team direct report that. And we don't pay any attention to that. So I think part of it, if you want to try and transform the culture in your building or your team or your department or whatever, is teaching the people that you work with how to give good feedback to each other. And then modeling, yes, that being willing to take feedback, preferably when it comes in the right form, but even sometimes the bad kind, at least teaches you how to respond in the moment, which is useful. So even if it comes down to something simple and memorable and that can fit on a sticker, like I see all these stickers on people's laptops, I notice and wonder, or I'm always noticing and wondering, or, something like that. That's a feedback strategy that anyone can use, anyone can learn, anyone can teach, right? If I think when I was in administrator school, it was, well, start with the students, notice something that the students are doing and ask reflective questions about that. That's another one. But you have to be deliberate about what you want the people in your school or your district doing when they're trying to give feedback to each other, if that's to be part of it. I also think, and this is challenging for leaders in particular, asking for feedback on your feedback. Was I useful to you when I was in your classroom? Was I a good evaluator to you? And it's okay if the answer is maybe not, because then at least I learned something and I learned whether I did a good job guiding you and coaching you and helping you become a better teacher. So I think that's a good start. And then I also think, the part of the question was about personal growth and getting better. It just comes down to know thyself, right? You might grow differently than I do. And so if I know the things that I need in order to get better, I can ask for them and I can seek them out. But how I learn might be different from how Bobby learns. And so each of us has to have that metacognition that will be the spur to real personal growth.
Elizabeth, I would be remiss if I didn't pick up on the nod to Socrates there with know thyself.
Yeah,
So
I'm tweeting it right now.
yeah,
I want to mention something Elizabeth touched on, which I agree is important about asking if the feedback was useful. And I think we can read that in books, we're told that, or read it in an HBR article, whatever it may be. But how do we respond when we get that feedback? So in some cases, if you're new to a leadership role, or if you want to try to go through this idea around the feedback, I would suggest talking to your coach if you're fortunate enough to have one, or an accountability partner, and literally role play that. Like, recognize it's sort of beginner's mindset, because if you ask for the feedback, which I 100% agree with Elizabeth saying we should do, and then you react negatively to it, that person's not going to give you feedback anymore. And they might even talk about it. Yeah, like, don't give Bobby feedback because he is not going to respond well. Just tell him it was fine, right? And then you're creating this dynamic. So I think really going through and practicing that is so important.
Sorry, I'm reading the chat and tweeting at the same time, doing a couple of things. Okay, so Jackie, let's have you enter the spotlight here.
Yeah, I think what Elizabeth and Bobby shared, those are both really important ideas for feedback. And I completely agree that we don't give enough training on how to provide and how to receive feedback. But I also think it's really important, and this kind of, we've talked about this a couple of times, is just how critical it is that you have a culture and a climate that is a space, a safe space for honest and open conversations about strengths and areas for improvement. So kind of even going back to that BLC that I discussed at the beginning that we have, I mean, yes, it's a group where they're all working toward growing in their own learning and they're all trying things out in the classroom, but after they set a goal to then go implement something and try something out based on the learning, and then they bring it back and they share how it went and they get feedback and suggestions from the other team members. So I think that's really critical. Again, just having those spaces where teachers and leaders feel comfortable receiving that feedback and not taking it personally. And just again, that idea that is going to help us grow and navigate these changes together. I also think it's really important, and I think it's something that Bobby had shared. So if he's the principal and he's asking for feedback on his feedback and he doesn't respond in a very positive way, or even if he does, but then doesn't quite like adjust and change based on the feedback, then that's not being a good role model for that either. So if we're going to ask for the feedback, and we really need to take it to heart, and we really need to consider, yeah, is this an area where I need to improve? So always just being role models for anything that we're trying to do within our school is really important.
Yeah, do you want to know the thing that I always think of that is encouraging and also terrifying? The people who are in the best position to give you feedback on your leadership abilities are the people that you lead. And so the person directly underneath you on the ladder. So if you're a principal, your assistant principal. If you're a department chair, it's your teachers. It's always the person right underneath you on the chain who is in the best position to see your flaws as a leader. So, and I mean, I've seen it both on both ends, right? So I feel like I'm every time I'm, working for a specific boss, I always think, I wonder if they know that they do this. I wonder if I'm brave enough to say something. And then I think, oh, the people that I run the department meetings for probably are sitting there with some great advice for me if I were ever brave enough to actually ask them for it. And yet the person that we ask for feedback is our boss, never our direct reports. It's very counterintuitive.
That also sounds like another area too, which could stand a little bit of paradigm shifting and adaptability, right? How we look at not only feedback but the hierarchy, and hierarchy I think is too strong of a word, but just maybe the flow of that and how that is delivered, how that is received, and then what action goes next, from that feedback. But I think that kind of the common thread I've heard is in all of this is just the intentionality and tuning your ear into the marrow of whatever shift is needed when we're talking about change, when we're talking about adaptability. I'm also echoing a little bit of our last week's panelist, Lauren Kaufman, who, she talked about how we need to be impeccable with our language and not necessarily dropping SAT words or whatever, but really being intentional with how we form our language and how we deliver that in a way that's going to foster a safe space and then dynamic action. So just some powerful thoughts here.
One thing I wanted to add about the modeling too is oftentimes, so I have people that report to me and then there's people reporting to them, right? And so about sort of how we can grow as leaders. So I may share a podcast or an article or a blog post and share my takeaways from it as a leader and say, I was thinking of a conversation we had. I thought you might find this interesting. Here's what I took away in some of the conversations that I have or that I do as a leader. So I'm not saying, here's something for you to read because you need to do it better, but it's more along the lines of, here's some growing that I'm doing and what I'm seeing, and trying to model that adaptability so they see that, so that we can have that sort of conversation where they're also impacting the people that report to them.
That's a really good and strong point, Bobby, is so often, I'm thinking back to my early principal days, where we used to subscribe to the master teacher, and you remember that little like trifold thing, and you put it in the mailbox, and again, kind of like they're going to get it, they're going to understand it, and everyone's going to read it cover to cover, and it's going to change. But again, to Elizabeth's point, we got to have a little bit of street cred with that, right? And so, kind of what you established there is this is something I'm reading, not necessarily that you have to read it, but I'm sharing how I'm growing from this, and we're modeling, that humility, modeling that lifelong love of learning, and then inviting and engaging in the conversation. So that's a really great approach. I know that you do that quite a bit on your X feed, something it's a newsletter or something that you'll read, and you'll just put it out there. Hey, this is what I thought. What do you think?
Yeah, it serves that purpose of inviting everyone into the conversation as well. It's modeling not only, you showing what you're learning and asking people what they think, that whole mindset there, but it's also asking anybody who is willing to take that step, right? Willing to reach out and say, yeah, I'll give that a read, into a larger conversation with anyone else who steps into that circle as well. And then they'll, hopefully that behavior is something that they take on. And then it's a ripple, right? We connect. So we're winding down here, and I just wanted to, since we did have such a great vibe of all of our panelists today, really building off of one another's points and ideas and strategies in building a nice little roundtable. If anybody had anything that they didn't get to, maybe like bring up, that was maybe something a little bit outside of our planned topics of conversation that you maybe wanted to throw out there before we wrap up and give everyone a chance to share their own social handles and connect further afterwards.
Yeah, I think I don't know that this is a soapbox moment per se, but something that I've been thinking as we've been talking really is that so much change happened without people's buy-in or intentional effort. I mean, for folks that have been teaching for decades, even look how different teaching is 10 years ago, let alone 20, let alone 30, let alone 40, or just when we were in school. And so, regardless of how zealously people might embrace change or make an intentional effort to make it happen, either because they're being dragged along or because they're pulling the chariot, it happens. And I think it could be useful for any educator, really, to reflect on how the change sort of happens by itself without any effort from us, and that in and of itself maybe makes it less scary.
Well said. Well said, Elizabeth.
You like the chariot metaphor, since we're in ancient history?
We'll take it. We'll take it. Anybody else?
Let's return.
So much good stuff here, Sarah. Can we go another hour? Can we? Feel like we need like maybe a part two.
Yeah.
I think this topic is so important, and all three of our panelists just bring such rich depth and insight and sensitivity to this topic. I think one of the things that I guess my big takeaway, if I want to model a little bit of Bobby here, is we have to be human centered in our approach, and know that learning, or hopefully the intent for learning amongst on the professional level, creates a sense of belonging. And I think that's something we have to be very cognizant of and intentional with. I'm blown away in a good way.
Well, I want to thank everyone who was able to stop by tonight, despite the temperature in wherever it is that you are joining us from, whatever the weather conditions, and thanking our panelists for, of course, the preparation that goes into an event like this, and for collaborating with us. We're so lucky to have everyone joining in and willingly working with Sean and I to make these panels happen. And there was one thing I wanted to say. Oh, yes, I dropped in the chat the link to where we are collecting all information and registration for future panels. There's also a way there if anybody ever did need, anyone attending did need some sort of professional learning certificate or proof that you were here. There's a way to connect and click a little thing and get a piece of digital evidence that you attended a panel. And there's also a way for you to immediately, probably within a few hours, be able to get any replays of not only this panel, but then anything that's been logged from past panels as well. So I think last week's is already up there. They're also available on Swivel's YouTube channel. And if anybody wants to share anyone who's not connected with one another already, in the Twitter sphere or any sphere wants to share their the ways that they'd like to connect in the chat, that would be awesome. I've been trying to tag people in some quotes that I needed to pull immediately as people were talking tonight. So I've been tagging some people as we've gone along, but it would be great to make sure that we all can do that afterwards. And I think that's it for me. Anything else you'd like to add, Sean?
Again, just an enormous level of gratitude. And when we have these kinds of conversations in which collegiality and connection happen, definitely I don't want it to end here. So, for those of you that are either watching the recorded webinar, know that you are seen and heard. For those of you that are tuning in now, you are seen and heard. So let's keep the conversation going in terms of adaptability, professional learning, and all ideas. This is the best way to do that. So you're not alone. Definitely following the hashtag adapt, lead, connect, or following any one of us through our social media handles. And this is kind of a sneak preview who we've got coming next week, Sarah. So thanks for pulling that up.
So yeah, I just wanted to flash just really quickly a couple things to mention. If you are looking, especially if you clicked on the link to look at what was coming up, there is likely going to be one. It's been a little tricky with the end of scheduling many people for one panel for the end of January, because a lot of the people who volunteered are attending major conferences in the next couple of weeks. So it's been a weird scheduling time after this week. But the next definite scheduled event is on February 6th, and we are going to be talking about AI forward leadership. And there is a third guest that will be there that is currently a surprise, because I'm 99% sure that they're going to be, 98% sure they're going to be the guest. I don't want to announce it yet, but it's a pretty sweet third guest that will be joining this panel. So that will be February 6th. You can already register for that. And if there's anything in between now and then, that will be on that landing page that you can find all the updates. I think that's it.
And I might add that for all of our panelists, be on the lookout for Elizabeth's new book coming late May, and the title again, Elizabeth, the full title.
Oh gosh, I don't even know if I remember that.
Yeah, come on.
You know how they get so long and then they get workshopped and the
Yeah.
DEF committee makes them it's something to do with turnover proof your systems.
Yes, so definitely check that out and follow Elizabeth, follow her writings. Just amazingly inspiring and insightful. Jackie, I saw that you put in the chat the PL Playbook podcast. I love the alliteration. I dig it. And definitely tune into Elizabeth's episode as well. And then Bobby, your wonderful book that came out that recently had a book birthday, Principal Leader. I also know that you've got a great newsletter as well that you put out weekly. So definitely all of your wisdom, all of your content. Friends, very grateful and very honored that you should spend some time with Sarah and me and spending some time sharing your gifts, your strengths, and your expertise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good night, everybody.